A prosperous entrepreneur walks into an upscale car dealership, ready to buy, but instead finds himself dismissed and humiliated by the manager. What starts as a routine visit soon escalates, revealing underlying biases and triggering a confrontation no one anticipated. It was a warm Saturday morning in Charleston, South Carolina, and the air was buzzing with weekend energy. Malik Daniels, a 38-year-old entrepreneur, pulled into the lot of Coastal Luxury Motors. His heart raced not with nervousness, but excitement. This wasn't just a car. It was the culmination of years of hard work and discipline. Malik had his eye on a sleek jet black sports car, the kind of vehicle that made you feel unstoppable. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer and tailored slacks, Malik stepped out of his Tesla, which had served him well over the years. He smoothed his tie and walked through the glass doors. The scent of new leather hit him immediately, and a few heads turned. Malik had a magnetic presence, confident but approachable. He was the kind of man who drew people in, with his charisma and professionalism. As he approached the front desk, a slender woman with sharp features and an icy smile looked up. Her name tag read Sandra. Sandra, the manageress of the dealership, greeted him with the kind of politeness that felt practiced rather than genuine. Her eyes flicked over him, pausing briefly as if scanning for something. "Good morning," Malik began, offering a warm smile. "I'm interested in the Jaguar F-Type outside. Could I speak to someone about running numbers?" Sandra tilted her head, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "That model starts at $80,000. Are you sure you're ready to commit to something in that price range?" Her tone was honeyed but carried an unmistakable edge. For a moment Malik didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. He decided to brush it off and remain professional. "I am aware of the pricing," he replied, keeping his tone even. "I'd like to start the process, if that's all right." Sandra hesitated, her smile faltering for a split second. "Well, let's just see if the car is still available," she said, picking up the phone but not dialing. Her eyes darted toward the showroom, where the Jaguar gleamed under the overhead lights. Malik felt a subtle shift in the air. He was used to proving himself in spaces where he wasn't always welcomed, but he hadn't expected it here. Not today. Still, he waited patiently, determined not to let anything ruin this moment. But as Sandra continued to stall, tapping her pen against the desk, it became clear that this was going to be more complicated than it needed to be. But before Malik could respond, Sandra's next comment would leave him wondering if he was about to face something far bigger than a simple car purchase. Malik's patience, while impressive, wasn't infinite. He cleared his throat and glanced at Sandra. "Is there an issue if the car isn't available? Perhaps I can take a look at similar models." Sandra set the pen down with a deliberate slowness, her lips pressing into a thin line. "The issue is," she began, pausing, as though searching for the right words, "we don't want to waste anyone's time, yours or ours. This is a high-end dealership, and we have certain protocols." Her words hit Malik like a slap, each syllable loaded with an implication she didn't need to spell out. He steadied himself, keeping his voice calm. "Protocols? I'm not sure I understand. I just want to run a credit check and see financing options, like any other customer." Sandra leaned forward slightly, her expression tightening. "I don't think this is the right dealership for you. Perhaps a more mid-range lot would better suit your needs." A murmur rippled through the showroom. Customers and employees were beginning to take notice of the exchange. Malik glanced around, his composure intact, but his mind racing. Was this really happening in 2024? In a city that prided itself on being a hub of progress? Was he being told no? Assumed he didn't belong here? Before he could respond, a young man in a grey polo stepped forward. His name tag read Ethan. His voice was hesitant, but his intention was clear. "Sandra, I can help him. We don't usually turn customers away, do we? Sandra shot him a glare that could have frozen water. Ethan, this isn't your call to make, she snapped. I'm following protocol. Ethan hesitated but didn't retreat. I just think he began. But Sandra cut him off. This is my dealership. I make the decisions here. Malik raised a hand, gesturing for Ethan to stand down. I appreciate your help, he said, addressing Ethan directly, his tone firm but polite. Then he turned back to Sandra. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to buy a car. If you're refusing to assist me, I'll have to escalate this. Sandra's smirk returned, colder than before. Escalate to who? You think this is some sort of discrimination case? She chuckled, the sound grating and condescending. Good luck proving that. Malik's jaw tightened, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He reached for his phone, intending to document the situation, but before he could press record, a voice from across the room interrupted. Excuse me, the voice said, firm and commanding. A man in a tailored suit with silver-streaked hair stepped forward. He carried an air of authority, the kind that made people listen. Malik turned, his expression shifting from frustration to curiosity. The man walked up to Sandra, his eyes narrowing slightly. I couldn't help but overhear, he said. I'm Tony Busby, an attorney, and I'd like to know why this gentleman is being denied service. Sandra faltered, her confidence visibly shaken. This is a private matter, she said quickly. It doesn't concern you? Tony ignored her, addressing Malik instead. Would you mind explaining what's been happening here? His tone was calm, measured, just the sort of demeanor Malik needed at that moment. Malik hesitated for a beat, then spoke clearly. I came in to purchase a car. I've been repeatedly dismissed and told I don't belong here. Tony nodded, then turned back to Sandra. Interesting, he said, his voice cool but pointed. Do you always determine who belongs here based on arbitrary assumptions? Sandra opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. But as the tension in the room grew thicker, it became clear that this wasn't just about Malik's car. It was about something much bigger. The showroom had gone silent. Customers stood frozen, some pretending to browse while others opally stared. Even the sales staff exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of whether to intervene or stay out of it. Sandra's defiance wavered as Tony Busby's calm, yet piercing gaze bore into her. I don't appreciate being accused of anything improper. Sandra finally stammered, her voice shaky. This gentleman simply doesn't meet the requirements we have for financing. That's all. Tony raised an eyebrow. Financing requirements? That's an interesting claim, considering you haven't even run his credit check. He gestured to the desk, where Sandra had yet to touch the keyboard. So tell me, what exactly are these requirements based on? Sandra's face flushed, but she stayed silent. Malik, still standing tall, glanced around the room. He could feel the tide shifting, not just in his favor, but towards something larger. People were paying attention now, their eyes no longer indifferent. This wasn't just a moment. It was becoming a statement. Tony took a step closer to Sandra, lowering his voice, but ensuring it carried across the room. Let me make this clear. Refusing to serve a customer based on assumptions or biases is not only unethical but potentially illegal. If this gentleman chooses to pursue this legally, I can assure you, it won't end well for your dealership or your career. Sandra's lips quivered as she tried to regain control. I don't need a lecture, she snapped, but the strength in her voice was gone. This is a misunderstanding. Tony tilted his head slightly. Is it? Then let's clear it up right now. Run the credit check, process his request, and let's see if it's really about finances or something else entirely. The air felt electric. Ethan, the young employee, stepped forward again, his voice hesitant but determined. I can take over from here, he said. I'll help, Mr. Daniels. Sandra glared at him, but before she could object, A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. One of the customers, an older woman holding a leather handbag, stepped forward. "I've been coming here for years," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've never seen anyone treated like this." Another man chimed in, his tone incredulous. "Exactly what's going on here? This is blatant." Sandra's authority was crumbling, and she knew it still. She clung to what little power she had left. "Fine," she hissed, motioning for Ethan to proceed. "But don't say I didn't warn you. If this turns out to be a waste of time." Malik said nothing. He handed his documents to Ethan, who quickly got to work within minutes. The results were clear. Malik's credit was impeccable, his finances solid. Ethan printed the report and handed it to Malik with a sheepish smile. "Everything checks out. Let's get you that car." Tony folded his arms, looking at Sandra with a pointed expression. "Well, it seems your protocols were mistaken. Or should I say non-existent?" Sandra looked like she wanted to melt into the floor, but before anyone could move forward, Malik raised a hand. "Hold on," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about me. How many others have walked in here and been treated like this? How many left without someone like Mr. Busby to step in?" The room grew even quieter. Malik turned to address the customers, who had been watching. "This isn't just about buying a car. It's about dignity, respect. If we let moments like this slide, nothing changes." But just as his words began to sink in, an unexpected voice from the back of the room spoke up, and what they revealed would take the situation to an entirely new level. A deep voice broke through the heavy silence. "He's not the first." Heads turned toward the back of the room, where a middle-aged man in a denim jacket stood, his arms crossed tightly. His face was weathered but resolute, and his eyes burned with conviction. Sandra stiffened. "Excuse me?" she snapped, her voice sharp but shaky. "You heard me," the man said, stepping forward. "I was here 2 months ago with my wife. We wanted to trade in her SUV for something newer. She's Latina and I'm white." The sales rep kept talking to me, like she wasn't even there, like she didn't exist when we called them out. They claimed the vehicle we wanted wasn't in stock, but I saw it parked right outside. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Another customer, a young black woman holding a toddler, hesitated before speaking up. "I came here last year," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was looking at a sedan. I thought maybe it was just me. But the salesman kept steering me toward the cheapest options. I had the money, but they didn't even bother showing me the financing plans." Sandra's face turned ashen as more voices chimed in. Each story painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. A culture of subtle and not so subtle discrimination that had quietly taken root in the dealership. It wasn't just one person or one incident. It was a pattern. Malik looked around, his heart heavy but determined. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, addressing the room. "These moments add up. They chip away at people. If we don't call them out, they become normal." Tony nodded, his expression serious. "This isn't just about bad behavior. It's systemic, and systemic problems require systemic solutions." Sandra tried to interject, her voice rising in desperation. "This is getting out of hand. We are a reputable business. We treat everyone fairly." But her words were drowned out by a new voice, this time from within her own ranks. Ethan, the young employee, stepped forward, his face flushed but resolute. "No, we don't," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've seen it. We have different standards for different people, and it's not right." The room erupted. Customers shouted questions. Employees whispered among themselves, and Sandra visibly struggled to maintain control. Malik took a step forward, raising his hand to quiet the crowd. "I didn't come here to cause chaos," he said, his tone steady but powerful. "But I also didn't come here to be dismissed. This isn't just about one dealership. It's about how we treat each other everywhere." But as the dust settled and the truth came to light, the question lingered. What would be done to make things right? The weight of Malik's words hung in the air, silencing the commotion in the showroom. Sandra's composure was unraveling, her icy demeanor replaced with visible frustration. Enough of this, she barked, slamming a hand on the counter. This is all being blown out of proportion. We run a professional operation here. Tony Busby stepped forward, his voice razor-sharp. Professional. Refusing service without cause isn't professional. It's discriminatory. And the multiple testimonies we've just heard suggest a much deeper problem. Sandra's eyes darted to the office door at the back of the showroom, where the dealership's general manager, a stout man named Douglas Harper, had emerged. He looked frazzled. Adjusting his tie as he walked toward the group. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice loud but strained, trying to project authority. Tony wasted no time. "What's going on is that your dealership seems to have a problem with fair treatment," he said, motioning toward the growing crowd of disgruntled customers. "This isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of bias and exclusion that your staff has perpetuated." Douglas's face flushed, but he forced a strained smile. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. Let's discuss this privately and resolve it amicably." Malik stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "No, this needs to be addressed here in front of everyone. Too many people have experienced this kind of treatment, and sweeping it under the rug won't change anything." The crowd murmured in agreement. Douglas shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. "Mr. Daniels, I assure you we take these accusations seriously. If there's been any misconduct, we'll investigate and handle it appropriately." Malik met his gaze unwavering. "Good, because I'm not going to let this slide. You don't get to dismiss people based on your assumptions or prejudices. That stops here." The tension was palpable, but then Ethan spoke up again. "If I may," he said, addressing Douglas, "I've worked here for 3 years. I've seen how we treat some customers differently, steering them toward cheaper cars, refusing to run credit checks, making excuses. It's not right, and if we don't address it, it's going to destroy our reputation." Douglas glared at Ethan, his frustration boiling over. "You out of line, son." But Ethan didn't back down. "No, sir, I'm not. I'm just telling the truth." The room fell silent, all eyes on Douglas. He seemed to deflate, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. After a long pause, he turned to Sandra. "We'll need to discuss your conduct further," he said stiffly. Then he looked at the crowd. "To everyone here, I sincerely apologize for any mistreatment you've experienced. This is not the standard we want to uphold." Malik took a deep breath, his anger cooling but his determination intact. "Apologies are a start," he said, "but actions speak louder. If you want to make this right, you need to change your practices starting now." Douglas nodded reluctantly. "You're right. We'll review our policies and retrain our staff to ensure fairness." The crowd remained skeptical, but there was a sense that something had shifted. Sandra stood frozen, her authority stripped away. Ethan looked relieved, but unsure of what would happen next. But even as the situation seemed to settle, the question remained, would real change follow? Or was this just damage control? The atmosphere in the showroom remained charged, a blend of relief and lingering doubt. Malik turned to the crowd, his voice calm but firm. "Words are a start, but we need to hold them accountable. This isn't just about one dealership. It's about changing how we approach situations like this everywhere." A ripple of agreement moved through the group. The older man who had spoken earlier gave Malik a nod of respect. "You've got my support. People like Sandra have gotten away with this for too long." Sandra, still standing behind the desk, looked stunned. Her position of authority, once so secure, had crumbled entirely. Douglas, now fully aware of the damage to his dealership's reputation, addressed the crowd again. "We'll begin a full review immediately. Any staff member found to have engaged in discriminatory practices will face consequences." Tony Busby stepped forward, his commanding presence drawing everyone's attention. I'll be following up to ensure this isn't just talk, he said, and if anyone here feels they've been wronged, my office will be taking statements. Sandra glared at him but said nothing. Malik, standing tall, extended a hand to Ethan. Thank you, he said sincerely. It takes courage to speak up, especially when it's not easy. Ethan shook his hand, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. It's the right thing to do. As the crowd began to disperse, many customers approached Malik to thank him for standing up. The young black woman with the toddler smiled warmly. What you did today matters, she said, for all of us. Outside, as Malik walked toward his car, Tony caught up to him. You handled that with grace, Tony said. I've seen situations like this spiral out of control, but you stayed calm. Malik nodded, his voice steady. It's not just about me, it's about showing that we don't have to accept this kind of treatment. We can demand better. Tony smiled, extending his card. If you ever need anything, let me know. You've got an ally. Malik took the card, gratitude flickering across his face. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. As he reached his Tesla, Malik glanced back at the dealership. It no longer felt like a place of rejection, but a starting point for something bigger. He knew the fight for equality didn't end here, but today was a step in the right direction. Moments like these remind us that progress doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept injustice. Malik's stand for justice is just one example of how we can all challenge the status quo. If this story moved you, think about how you can make a difference in your own life. Like, subscribe, and share to help amplify the voices fighting for fairness and equality.